Hi, my name is Jonas Cleveland, and it's a real pleasure to have our keynote speaker here today. I know many of you knew that he was supposed to speak last year. Unfortunately, he suffered a back injury and wasn't able to be with us, but we have him here today after a delayed flight and a bunch of situations. He's here with us, so we're very thankful. Today we have the distinct pleasure of hearing from one of the foremost voices in the Black community in modern civil rights movement. Born in Detroit, Michigan during 1958, Dr. Dyson struggles in his hometown segregated high school soon found him a teenage father living off the welfare system. Finding purpose and support in the church, Dyson returned to high school and after working in maintenance and auto sales to support his family, eventually became an ordained Baptist minister. Today, Dr. Michael Eric Dyson is a university professor of sociology at Georgetown University and holds a PhD in religion from Princeton University. A renowned public intellectual, Professor Dyson's innovative scholarship, combining cultural criticism and biography, focuses on race, religion, popular culture, and contemporary issues in the Black and African American community. He is the author of 16 books. They're all found in the intro in the bulletin, but Dyson's 15th book, released in 2007, Know What I Mean, is a critical study of hip-hop music, addressing issues ranging from the music's creative expression to the global exposure, commercialization, and politicization of rap music and its most influential figures. His previous book, Debating Race, is a compilation of previously unpublished conversations with scholars, politicians, and public commentators. He's also authored Come Hell or High Water, Hurricane Katrina, and The Color of Disaster. His Bill Cosby writer has the mad Black middle class lost his mind. The Michael Eric Dyson reader, Open Mic, Holler If You Hear Me, Searching for Tupac Shakur, Why I Love Black Women, I May Not Get There With You, The True Martin Luther King Jr., Race Rules, Navigating the Color Line, Between God and Gangsta Rap, Making Malcolm, The Myth and the Meaning of Malcolm X, and Reflecting Black. Dyson is also named one of the 100 most influential Black Americans by Ebony Magazine. A popular Barack Obama supporter, Dr. Dyson is perhaps mostly known as a regular commentator on NPR, CNN, and the HBO's Real Time with Bill Maher. It is a pleasure and an honor for me to welcome our keynote speaker, Dr. Eric Michael Dyson.
Thank you so much, my brother, for that very gracious introduction, for Brother Jonas Cleveland, for that rousing and stimulating invitation to think about myself. Not in that way. To President Jared Cohen, whose graciousness and hospitality always warm the heart, to Sister Renee, and to so many of the other fine members of the staff who have been gracious and hospitable to me, and to my lovely sister who met me at the airport and had to deal with some silliness, but here we are nonetheless. It wasn't my silliness, I just want to be clear about that. As my daddy used to say, were you cutting the food? But what an honor to be here today, back again here at this great institution of learning, Carnegie Mellon, a world-class institution of higher education. And I want to thank the student body president, Brother Itkowitz, for his graciousness, and the brilliance of these students, Brother Carlton Reeves and Sister Taryn Hall. Weren't they extraordinary in their speaking? Was it Irving Berlin who wrote those words, "I just feel so unnecessary"? I didn't have to make this trip here, even though it's good to be here in Tomlin's shadow. There's a guy on the plane, dear white brother, saw a lot of people taking pictures and getting autographs. He says, "Are you a Steeler?" I said, "Yes, sir, Jerome Bettis." All right. So get on the bus. We both from Detroit, don't make no difference. Y'all feeling pretty good here in Pittsburgh. Trying to take it to that old man, Kurt Warner, but he's old. Old people get desperate. So be careful of his wily skill. Especially old people who have been counted out and come back. That's a beautiful thing. 38 ain't old in the real world, but in the world of sports it is. 38, you're old in sports. You're a young person if you're an executive. So it depends on your perspective. But what an honor to be here. I'm so sorry. I rarely cancel. I have to be really down on my back, and I literally was last year. I would have come here like that, but I would have scared you to death. So I'm honored to be here today, back again, and I count it a signal honor that your great president and all of the wonderful staff who invited me here have opened their arms to me again. Now, I want to talk about, as the program mentions it, I want to thank Sister Ashley Burroughs, too, for that great leading us in all three verses of Lift Every Voice and Sing. Makes you think about it, doesn't it? All those verses, right? I want to talk about this great subject, King Obama and the American Dream. Because as we stand poised tomorrow for the inauguration of the 44th President of the United States, that's just a mind-blowing thing in its own right. We could meditate on that alone. It's only been 44 men who have occupied the Oval Office. That's a pretty remarkable fellowship and, as yet, fraternity that those distinguished men have belonged to. Hillary Clinton almost made it a sorority. And even though I supported my man Barack Obama, I'm a huge Hillary Clinton lover. A lot of people hating on Hillary. A lot of it was sheer sexism. Sheer sexism. They invented that she was mean and nasty and had horns and was the devil. And you talk to her and engage with her, she's so warm and gracious and highly intelligent. And that's why she got the plum roll. She got a plane, and now she can go on to the Middle East and try to work that out. But I supported Barack Obama, and the fact that he is the 44th President of the United States is something one can scarcely grasp. Usually when you mention a black man in 44, it's a high-caliber pistol. When I was a young boy, I'm 50 now, in Detroit, Michigan, we were traveling, my family and I, few sons, eventually would be 5 sons, and my mother and father down from Detroit to visit our grandparents in Georgia and Alabama. We stopped in Nashville, Tennessee, and my mother took us into the restaurant, and we sat there. This beautiful, bright young woman and her children. And they said, "We don't serve niggers here." And my mother didn't want to tell my father because one of the most ignominious consequences of the lethal and explosive reality of race is that it often put black men in a difficult position. Here you were, on the one hand, responsible for taking care of your family. Society, even through a patriarchal lens, viewed you as a breadwinner and a participant in the domestic shaping of one's family, and yet the means to achieve that were often hobbled with bigotry that limited what they could do. And so she didn't want to tell my father, because she didn't want to reinforce a sense of powerlessness to a man who couldn't even get his family a sandwich and something to drink when he had the money to pay for it because of the color of his skin, creating anger, humiliation, and thus my mother absorbed the hit, tried to protect the psyche of her children, and we departed from that restaurant. And now, less than 40 years later, we have seen the ascent of a man who, as Brother Reeves has indicated, despite the color of his skin, despite the bigotry that may be associated with other people who may have that skin, this man was embraced by millions of people in this country and by millions more around the globe. Barack Obama is an extraordinary man. And we see that extraordinary story reflected in so many local narratives as I listen to Brother Reeves and his intelligent and beautiful mother, thinking about the courage and the compassion of white parents to adopt black children. I know that's controversial for some people. They say, well, we don't know if white folk should be raising black folk, so let's just leave them in the foster home. Let's just leave them to their own circumstances so they can be real black and poor and struggling and oppressed, as opposed to being adopted by a loving family who can raise, obviously, a brilliant, strong black man. It does kill a lot of the stories that you got to be one thing to raise another thing, right? Black men in the embrace of a certain patriarchal perspective, though undeniably cogent because of their restriction to be able to nurture their own, and the demonization of black masculinity, think that, well, a black man only can raise a black man. There have been plenty of sisters who have raised strong black men in America. So we don't want to have a biological determinism and a racial determinism. Steven Spielberg wants to adopt black children. Madonna rather be poor, whether in Africa or in Pittsburgh. We got to say thank God for some people of conscience. I wish I could get adopted by Spielberg. I was call him Pops. Can I spin around in the Porsche and go up on the lot, hang out a little bit, and kick it with my peeps? This is a beautiful kind of situation. I don't deny the complexities and complications of what that might mean in terms of people being able to foster and develop their own children when the state intervenes in negative fashion. I get that and completely comprehend it. But the broader picture here of a family that was compassionate in the mainstream, opening their house and heart to a young man like Brother Reeves. And then listening to Sister Hall tell, both with humor and insight, about the belief that the dream was achieved and that we had overcome It's awful honest of a young person to admit that, because a lot of young people who have been benefited by the struggles of people older than them don't necessarily appreciate what the old folk went through to get where they is. Right? Those grammatical solecisms that dot the linguistic landscape nonetheless are the warehouse of profound wisdom. And so she admitted, bless her heart, and so many others of us can't admit that we thought it was set until we came to Pittsburgh or Philadelphia, or Detroit or New York or in Appalachia, deep down in the Delta. And so many people think because Barack Obama is president, we now live in a post-racial world. Well, first of all, that ain't even a good ideal, nor a good idea. You see, we don't want to be post-racial. Post-racial assumes that we have no constitutive elements to our identities that are produced by the positive reinforcement of self-affirmation. So we don't have to give up being black to be American. White brothers and sisters don't have to stop being white to be American. In fact, most white brothers and sisters are never asked about the contradiction between their whiteness and their Americanness because they've been collapsed. With black folk, Latino folk, Asian folk, it's the opposite. My, how can you imagine being the unified embodiment of American identity and your particular racial identity? But see, we don't want to be post-racial. I don't want to stop being a brother. This is all I know how to be right about now. This is it. I can't learn much of anything else. And plus, it's pretty cool to be a brother right about now. You know, when I see Barack Obama, and forgive me, I know it sounds perhaps sacrilegious to you, with that pimp stroll, I don't mean that in a literal sense. I'm not suggesting that he's on the corner telling Mary and Shaniqua to get that dough. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a stylistic aesthetic of cool. Then he greet in person, right hand, brother pound on the back, what's up? Right? And just the way he talks. They said that we couldn't make it. They said that we couldn't do it. Don't hate the player. So don't eradicate the distinctive elements of your identity in order to placate a conception of racelessness that is a myth to begin with. And the beauty of who we are is that we can all come together, e pluribus unum, out of many one. You see, if you give up being who you is, when you get up in the spot, you've negated the argument for you being there in the first place. The reason we brought you in, bruh or sis, is cause you bring your particular flavor with you. You see, when white brothers and sisters come to hear Luther Vandross, they not coming to hear Frank Sinatra. And ain't no knock on the chairman of the board. Fly me to the moon and let me play among the stars. He was a brilliant man, but Luther was something different. Don't you remember? I told you I loved you, baby, 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 woo, baby. Don't give that up. We need Frank Sinatra. We need that brother to establish the metrics of the American song, to interpret the brilliance of Berlin, but we need sassy Sarah Vaughan and Ella Fitzgerald too. A tisket, a tasket, a brown and yellow basket. Y'all don't know nothing about that, but I'm just, y'all still stuck on Lil Wayne and Weezy and them, but that's, so it's not either or. Let's not eradicate Miles Davis's trumpet so he can sound bland and universal. No, we should not erase the specific manifestation of the gifted identities with which God has blessed us. We should not aim toward a post-racial society. We should aim toward a post-racist society. And what that means is that we don't want to stop being who we are. We want you to stop having negative viewpoints about who we are. And that means we, all of us, white, black, brown, red, yellow, across the rainbow. Martin Luther King Jr., graduating at 15 from Morehouse College because of the early entrance for young students decimated and their numbers depleted in World War II. Went to college to study sociology with Walter Chivers and then theological ethics with George Kelsey and listening to the great Benjamin Elijah Mays. Graduating at 19, going on to seminary, went to Boston University, to get a PhD in philosophical theology, comparing the theologies of Henry Nelson Wyman, who was a personalist, who believed that God intervenes as a human energy into the affairs of men and women, versus Paul Tillich, who believed that God was the ground of one's being, not a personal intervention in human history, but the fact of one's existence. That's what he was doing at 26, breaking that off in a proper fashion. So don't be acting like that blackness ain't about intelligence. Depends on what strand of blackness you trying to pick up. See, when folks say that there are certain black people who say, well, getting your lesson, that's what my daddy used to say, getting your lesson, that means studying. My daddy didn't say you're going to engage in an active pedagogical exchange. He said, I'm going to learn you a lesson. Now, he didn't say teach either. He said, learn you a lesson. Is that epistemic dissonance? Learn you a lesson? You gonna learn for me? No, what he was trying to suggest is more than that kind of infelicitous turn of phrase. It was a deeply philosophical meditation upon the nature of how knowledge invests the teacher and the student in a reciprocal expansion of knowledge and experience. And so, learning a lesson is what blackness is about. When black folk talk about acting white, that ain't a whole bunch of black folk, because we want to get rid of the notion that to talk a certain way is to be black and to be allergic to knowledge. Like you got to be quarantined in ignorance. No, we know that ain't a black thing. We done had 8 years. I don't know about you, but brains are back and it feels good. It just, and both of them went to Harvard, so it ain't about pedigree. But boy, the one that went to Harvard and the one that went to Harvard, there's a difference. So it can't be Harvard. Got to be what you do when you get to Harvard. And if that ain't an argument for the fact that what we must do is sharpen our minds. Martin Luther King Jr. was a student his entire life. And when he stood up, when he was called upon to be the leader of the Montgomery Improvement Association, he didn't have but 5 minutes to get his speech together. If you ain't studied, it ain't gonna come out of you right then. Ain't no such thing as, Lord, give me the words to say. Did you study the words? I could help you remember what you studied, but I can't give you nothing made up. That's just like me going before the Nobel Prize Committee in mathematics saying, recognize my genius in mathematics if I ain't studied mathematics. God is going to give me E equals MC squared. That ain't going to happen. You got to study thermodynamics and Brownian motion. You got to go like Einstein to a Byrne patent office, and you got to dig deep into the algorithm of the mathematical knowledge of Gödel, and you got to figure out what the world is about as a picture of knowledge. Einstein said imagination was more important than knowledge because ultimately physics was a poetic attempt by scientific minds to trace the lineage of the divine presence. And so, my brothers and sisters, studying hard is a black thing. Having insight is a black thing. Frederick Douglass says, learning unfits a child for slavery. Because when you learn something and you know what you're worth, you will be unable to accept second-class citizenship. And so Martin Luther King Jr. fought against the demons of white supremacy and social injustice and ultimately economic inequality. And then, of course, he was not very popular when he began to speak out against the war in Vietnam. Many of you young people may not know, and older people tend to forget, that when King died, he was not a very popular man. It's easy to make up now like he was always popular. Do you realize that by the time he died, for the first time in 10 years, he had not made the Gallup polls list for the 10 most admired Americans? Do you realize that Martin Luther King Jr. could hardly get an American university to have him lecture? Do you realize that Martin Luther King Jr. didn't get put on the board of trustees at his own alma mater, a historically black college, because the then white chairman of the board of trustees, Brother Merrill, Marilyn Lynch, said that King was a poor role model. Why? Because he went to jail too often. He wasn't selling crack. He was trying to crack open the doors of opportunity for all people. And so Martin Luther King Jr. fought for the soul of this nation. He was not very popular. He wasn't just fighting for black folk. He was fighting for everybody. Martin Luther King Jr. changed what white Americans and Latino Americans and Asian Americans and folk from all over the globe, immigrants coming here to seek the great American dream. He made it possible for all of them to speak a different language and a vocabulary of what was possible. Don't quarantine Martin Luther King Jr. as a great black leader. He was a great American leader. He studied hard. He was sharp and intelligent. He fought against the forces that deny us the opportunity to enjoy as human beings. But at the end of his life, when he spoke out against economic inequality, he said, look, when I defended the Civil Rights Bill, I had support. It didn't cost the nation anything. When we got Voting Rights Act, it didn't cost the nation anything. Now this will cost the nation because we're talking about economic inequality. And we're talking about why people are poor, why white poor people are in Appalachia, why poor people of color and white brothers and sisters down in the Delta, why folk who are working in automobile factories now have seen their resources dry up and their wages be depleted. King was concerned, he said, about the empty bellies of America's poor children. He said, we're getting rid of tons of food today. I know where we can store it, in the bellies of those poor kids who can't even eat every night. Give education to them. Martin Luther King Jr. opened up a vista, a grand horizon of American democracy so that all human beings could see what was possible when we took democracy seriously. See, they called him an un-American, called him anti-patriotic. Ain't that something? The folk willing to die for the nation, shed their blood, those upon whose backs American possibility rests. When Barack Obama will be sworn in the Capitol, it was built by slave labor. The White House built by slave labor. These are not lazy and people who are disinclined to work hard, yet they could not benefit from their labor, from their industrious work. And yet they were never tempted to leave the nation. They did not secede. And yet, brothers and sisters in the South who were tired of America because America wanted to wrestle with slavery left America. They seceded. And we never left. And we are called un-American because we want to get treated right. It is a strange assignment, this patriot versus anti-patriot language. That's why I'm glad Barack Obama gonna be the president. Let's get rid of the fact you and I can disagree and we both Americans and we love the nation. Right? We might not like your administration, but we love government. Your administration is Dick Cheney? My God, is that a scary guy or what? Donald Rumsfeld? You ain't got no copyright on American defensive practices in an international landscape where your cowboy aesthetic and your politics of the American juggernaut meet up against the world community's disdain for America. They done made it hard to say you from America. Where you from, Jamaica? But you're blonde, blue-haired, and 6'4". That's all right, man. Got the ganja. We're all black and American now. And so, the restoration of the dignity of America rests in the hand of a man himself, Barack Obama, who was called un-American. Sarah Palin said she could see Russia from her backyard. I ain't mad at Sarah Palin. She's doing her thing. Called Barack Obama palling around with terrorists. Called him un-American. Called him a communist. Called him everything but a child of God. And yet this man defended America's ideas to the world, and yet he was the great and most eloquent language that we could have to convince the rest of the world that we were still invested in democracy. That's why the world community loves Barack Obama. 200,000 folk in Berlin turning out to see a black man talk. That's what Biggie said. Just to hear Biggie Smalls speak. Right? I know y'all went to see Notorious. Don't know. It was all a dream. Used to read Word Up magazine. Salt and Pepper Heavy D up in the limousine. I used to let my tape rock till my tape. Yeah. Right. Then he said, his mama, you know, we used to fuss when the landlord dissed us. No heat, wondered why Christmas. Birthdays were the worst days. Now we sip champagne when we... Damn right I like the life I live, because I went from negative to positive, but you don't hear me though. And if you don't know, now you know. Excuse me, old people, that's just for the young folk. Stereotypes of a black male misunderstood. And so Barack Obama commands world attention because of his elegant deportment, his amazingly graceful demeanor, his embodiment of what it means to be an American. It is not contradictory to suggest that we are proud of him as a black man and we are proud of him as an American. You know, when his wife, Michelle Obama, made a so-called gaffe and said this was the first time she was proud, they took her stuff out of context. Then they put her in witness protection program. Now, you mean to tell me you don't get that? If historically the nation has not exactly lived up to the true meaning of its creed, are you telling me as an honest American you don't get it? That if people have spit upon you and water hosed you because you simply wanted to live like them in this memory of the country. You don't get why they wouldn't necessarily celebrate the 4th of July. The same way, still love the country, still go to foreign wars to defend it and give their life for it. But you want us to be grateful to be treated as second-class citizens. Don't you understand that now when I sing America, it means something different? Because we own a part of that now, vicariously, through this man's ascent. You don't get that. That when we sing about the purple wave of grain, now it means something different. Because now this man has ascended as the president of everybody, that we have an extra sense of pride. That when we state the Pledge of Allegiance, it means something just a bit different now. Our chests are more heaving with pride. My country, 'tis of thee, sweet land of liberty, of thee I sing. Not in a kind of narrow, xenophobic, ethnocentric claim on Obama, because he ain't the black president, he's the black president. That's different in the adjectival descriptions we give to modify the noun. He everybody president. I know some black folk thought when Barack became president, they didn't have to pay taxes. Don't get Wesley sniped up in here. Don't. I love you, Wesley. Some black folk thought, oh my God, we don't have to go to jail no more. Negro, you going to jail. But what it does mean is that now we have purchase on the American dream, that we feel identified with the nation in a special way, and you can understand that. I have a sense of pride of him as a black man. I got to go on Today Show tomorrow morning. I know Matt and Laura are going to ask me, is there something special to me? Yes, because my mother's on the phone yesterday crying. 71 years old, because of incidents like the one I told you about when she was a little girl. You gonna serve that little nigga girl first before you serve me? Now, we're not holding any grudges, because Martin Luther King Jr. taught us to love everybody. And we don't hate people and despise people and get angry at people because of their race. That would be to buy into the very notions of ethnocentrism that Martin Luther King Jr. spent his life against. What it does mean is that we should not live in a post-racial society, but a post-racist one. We should not live in the United States of amnesia. And so Martin Luther King Jr. fought and bled and died. He mixed his blood with the soil. There on a desolate balcony in rainy Memphis, where he stood about to get his overcoat because it was too chilly, Samuel Billy Cowles, the minister in Memphis, waiting on him on the steps, Jesse Jackson down in the courtyard, Ralph Abernathy behind him about to fetch the coat, Andrew Young hovering near, Dr. King talking to Ben Branch to play Precious Lord for me because he played with Jesse Jackson's Operation Push Band. Play it real pretty for me. And then a report rang out across the courtyard. It found its target with lethal accuracy, there to explode its message of death deep inside of his neck. The blood began to spill, the prophet's blood, onto the pavement, and there Ralph Abernathy extracted a cardboard from a laundered shirt and scooped into a jar the blood of King, saying, "This is the blood of Martin shed for us." Jesse Jackson dipped his hands into that blood and wiped them on his shirt and appeared the next morning on the Today Show. King's stains, his blood stained into Jackson's shirt, a symbolic passing of the mantle, the blood of the prophet on his shirt, and Jesse Jackson to a special meeting of the city council, and the mayor said that everybody who stood against King and didn't do everything they could have his blood on their hands. And so this unpopular prophet, unpopular with white Americans and many black Americans too, and posthumously, many white Americans wanted him clawless, and many black Americans wanted him flawless. We want to take the teeth out of King. We freeze him before the 1963 March on Washington, as if he ain't never gave another speech, as if he didn't say what he believed. He said later that year, I saw my dream turn into a nightmare. When 4 little girls were blown up in Birmingham, and on the streets of Watts, where the language, he said, a riot is the language of the unheard. When he saw the riots there, Martin Luther King Jr. stood at the sunlit summit of expectation, and the beauty of that speech, the power of that speech is magnificent. But people missed the most revolutionary part of it. 50 years ago, a great American in whose symbolic shadow we stand today signed the Emancipation Proclamation. There, Lincoln hovering over him. And then for anybody else, it would have been an A+ speech. But for Martin Luther King Jr., reading wasn't his thing. Not reading the speech, and they ain't had no teleprompters. He reading the speech, and that's not him at his best. So Mahalia Jackson, women were not allowed to speak that day except they could sing. Mahalia Jackson, a friend of the King family, because black women will find a way regardless. Even if they ain't on program, their bodies ain't there, their voices will be there, resonating in your brain. Women of all stripes and colors have learned in a sexist culture to penetrate those patriarchal barriers, regardless of the stratagems of sexism. And so she said, tell him about the dream, Martin. King put the paper down and said, despite the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. But he had already announced that we are marooned on a tiny island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. He'd already announced that the winds of revolt would continue to shake the foundations of America until the Negro was granted his citizenship rights. He'd already talked about police brutality. He said that the Negroes in the South couldn't vote, and the Negroes in the North believed they had nothing for which to vote. And then he came to that part where Mahalia said, pick it up with the spirit. And so he got deep into it, and he cast the paper aside. From the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire, let freedom ring. From the mighty mountains of New York, let freedom ring. From Lookout Mountain of Tennessee, from every hill and molehill of Mississippi, from every mountainside. He said, one day, my 4 little children will live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And he said, this will be the day when all of God's children, black men and white men, Jews and Gentile, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join together in the singing of that Negro spiritual, free at last, thank God Almighty, we're free at last. But he gave an even more powerful and poignant speech the night before he died. There, King standing in Memphis in a pulpit, talking about defending poor black workers. The bourgeois Negro ministry wasn't necessarily invested in defending poor folk. They didn't want to get their Cadillacs stained and their churches messed up. And so King said, that's not right. You are more interested, he said, a few weeks before that, a couple months before that, in the wheelbase of your automobile than you are in the poor people who made it possible for you to get those Cadillacs. If he was speaking now, he'd have said, riding on 20s with the top down. And so King was critical of those black ministers who refused to defend the vulnerable, and bourgeois black leaders who were lambasting the poor without attempting to help them. We see that played out today. Famous black entertainers going around the country beating up on poor folk, dogging them out as opposed to trying to help them, as if you berating them in public is going to help them. And how arrogant and hypocritical, because many of the families of poor people do far better morally than folk with a bunch of money. And some of the people doing the instructing would do well to take a hard look in the mirror. That's why you got to be very careful when you use a bully pulpit as a way to chide the vulnerable. Martin Luther King Jr. said we must be concerned about them. He said the black middle class has forgotten what it means to have the foul stench and odor of social suffering in their own nostrils because they left the side stream and got involved in the mainstream. But he said God calls us to a awareness of those who are poor. And so at the end of his life, he defended the vulnerable, and he stood that night with those sanitation workers from Memphis who were trying to get fair wages. King said, if we don't treat them right, we treat nobody right. And as you heard Sister Hall talk about this extraordinary last speech King gave when he said, America, be true to what you said on paper. If you said it, live it. I love this country enough to tell it the truth. And then an assassin's bullet failed him. Martin Luther King Jr. went instantly from a pariah to a prophet, from a man who was unpopular to the most popular figure one could imagine. Now he's got a birthday celebration in his name. 40 years after his assassination, we're about to experience an inauguration. The distance from King's assassination to Obama's inauguration is a quantum leap of faith that neither cynics nor boosters could predict. 40 years later, this brilliant young man, standing with the confidence that he could be president, even when most black folk didn't believe it. I didn't say white brothers and sisters, I said bloods. Black folk were not with Obama at the beginning. I know, I was there. I looked around. Me and several white people were saying, yes, we can. Right? Don't act like you was there. You know, now you can't find a person that didn't march with Dr. King who's black or a white brother and sister who didn't love him. So black folk, yeah, I marched with Dr. King back in 1915. Now, he wasn't born in 1929, but don't let that stop you. It amazes me now that if you hear any criticism of Obama, black folk get crazy. Oh, no, you didn't talk about Jesus. Now, where was this belief in Obama when he started? Black leadership class arrayed against him. Told him, wait his turn. You ain't ready yet. Said some funky stuff about the brother. He kept on going. Black leadership class said, you have jump skipped and you have leapfrogged over a bunch of folk in line, as if that's how leadership was distributed, as if charisma and competence and ability rest upon what you can distribute. If ever it is proved that God don't need your permission to put in place who the Almighty would, and forgive that reference to the divine in a secular institution, whether you believe the forces of destiny are controlled by mere human beings, you can't determine what's going to happen. Neither would King. Older leadership didn't like him. Roy Wilkins from the NAACP said, are you actually going into the streets? How undignified. We must fight this battle in the suites and in the courts. And so older black leadership thought King's direct, nonviolent action in the streets was dangerous. As Ms. Hall recited to you, King, understanding that Bull Connor not only didn't understand history and didn't read it, but King understood he could manipulate Bull Connor. When Bull Connor unleashed those water hoses and those horses, and the bicuspids and incisors of police dogs ripping the vulnerable flesh of children and women, he made many white Americans uncomfortable who were trying to eat their dinners while watching the television full of this chaos. King was a brilliant dramaturgist. He was a thespian of the first order. He had a sense of the dramatic, and so he orchestrated the public presentation of black suffering that would appeal to white Americans across the country and to members of the world community around the globe. Older leaders were hating on him. At the March on Washington, they jockeyed to be first because CBS was going to be the only cameras there that day, and they knew they were only going to be on for a little while. Let me speak first then while the camera's on. So they said they're going to put King last, plus we ain't going after him. And a strange thing happened. They pushed King last, and instead of CBS leaving, ABC and NBC joined them. So you might have meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. So now, not only does King have CBS by the time he's supposed to speak for about, they gave him 8 minutes. He took 19. The length, we hope, of Mr. Obama's speech as it freezes tomorrow. King took 19 minutes and transformed the world, the jangling discords of our society, into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood. He took 19 minutes and he inscribed into the collective imagination of America the bold strokes of democracy. But the older folk were hating on him. Now those same older folk who stood with King while the older folk hated on him, hated on Obama. Too young, don't know what you're doing, you ain't really black enough. Bill Clinton blacker than you, he done had more sisters than you. Now that might be true. Brother Bill going to the church, he knew the hymns and the hymn lines. I don't write the news, I'm just recording history. Thank you. Bill Clinton didn't need no paper for the third verse. I saw y'all looking around, stone either God of our weary. Is that a verse? Bill Clinton singing it by heart. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears. Come on, Negroes. God who has led us thus far. Black folks said, I think he making that up. That ain't real. Night King died and got murdered. He was a student at Georgetown. He was reciting by heart the I Have a Dream speech. Deep, I'm almost done, deeply involved in black culture and history, but because he got so close, he could also be so exploitative. He signed a crime bill and welfare reform that devastated millions. That crime bill made the disparity between crack and powdered cocaine a law and put people in the jail for $25 vials of crack, but it took $10,000 of an offense for powdered cocaine to get the same sentence. They said he got to wait his turn, you ain't black enough, and what does that mean? Because his mama was white and his daddy was black. African to be exact. Now, you can look at me to see that the tradition of edifying intermarriage, intermingling, and sexual escapades across the axes of rigid epidermis fetish has always existed. I mean, if you shake the genetic tree of most black folk, Italians, Irish, Polish, Jewish, Lithuanians, Native American, everybody fall out. Because people love chocolate. It's true. You got your peanut butter in my chocolate. I got my chocolate in your peanut butter. Halle Berry's mama was white. Told Halle Berry, but in America, you a black woman. Don't ever forget it. There have been so many interesting alliances of race that have challenged the narrow bigotry on all sides. And so because his mama was white in Kansas and his daddy was African from Kenya and black folks said he wasn't black enough, let me get this straight, his daddy's from Africa. That's not on the south side of Chicago. Kenya, ain't that a suburb of Texas? No, bro, that's on the continent. Herding goats. That's on some African tip. And he ain't black enough. And you from Georgia. It teaches the nation about different follicle constituencies. Follicular comparisons are unavoidable. We don't have to deny that to say, but they're for all of America. He wasn't black enough, they put him down, he got to wait his time. It's not time yet. You can't tell nobody when the people acclaim him that it ain't time. The people demanded that he run. And then when he signed up, most of the black leadership was against him. And then he won Iowa. Black folks said, you know, it ain't before Negroes in Iowa. I don't even know if they got a Kentucky Fried Chicken in Iowa. And so black folks start telling you, hey, baby, that boy won Iowa. That what? Yeah. Barack Obama, we got to get with him. We got to give him a chance. Because black folk don't never vote for you just because you black. Despite what people tell you, we don't do that. Clarence Thomas run, he gonna get 4 votes. 3 from his people, and he gonna vote for himself. My point is, as I take my seat, my brothers and sisters, Barack Obama won the old-fashioned way because he told America he had a better vision. That's why he didn't get obsessed with race. He wasn't trying to make it about vote for me because I'm a black man. Vote for me because I'm the best candidate running. And black folk at our best have always understood that that's all we were asking for. Give us the chance to prove we got the goods. Do you think Jackie Robinson was the first ball player who could have played professional sports as a baseball player? Babe Ruth hit 714 home runs. Brother Josh hit 899. Major leagues, it wasn't major till brothers got involved. When you tie the arms of participants behind their backs with the rope of bigotry, you do not have the greatest until you let everybody participate equally. That's right now, baseball is basically a Latino affair. With some white guys and some brothers thrown in for good measure. And now with Obama being president, could be basketball could take over as the national pastime. Hoops will become a national obsession. So what's interesting, it seems to me, is that when we understand that all we've ever wanted was to show America we could be good for everybody, not just for ourselves. When people say you have to stop being black to be accepted, Roberta Flack ain't got to stop being black for white brothers and sisters to understand. Killing me softly with his song, killing me softly with his word. Right? Speaking about, I think, Don McLean. And so Sarah Vaughan, Toni Morrison, they don't have to stop being who they are and doing what they do to be accepted. Barack Obama is a black man, but he's not only for black people. He's rooted in but not restricted by his blackness. Three different forms of blackness: accidental, incidental, and intentional. Accidental, I'm an American, I just happen to be a Negro. Oh, okay. Incidental, I'm rooted in but not restricted by my blackness. Barack Obama. Roots should nurture, they should not strangle. And Barack Obama said, I will draw from that blackness, but it will not exhaust my universe. I'm proud of what I am, but all that I am is not exhausted by that description of that adjective before that noun of my personhood. Then you got intentionally black. I'm black, that's what I do, that's what I've been doing, that's what I know, that's who I is. Now, depending on where you are, black people do all three of those. If you're before the Supreme Court and you make an argument to defend affirmative action, you're intentionally black. If you at the company picnic, right? Well, let's just say this. If you down in South Carolina like Barack Obama, and you want to communicate to black people in South Carolina, I feel your pain, I love you, I know you, I'm rooted in you, but I got to speak to everybody, you signify. What did Barack Obama do in that speech 3 days before he won the primary? He asked black people, do you know you've been bamboozled? You've had the okie doke. Y'all know what the okie doke is? Yeah, they laughed. He said, you've been bamboozled, you've been hoodwinked, you've been took. Who was he quoting? But he wasn't going to say it. I'm quoting Malcolm X from Spike Lee's movie. That would have gone over like a brick cloud. I have fallen in whiteness and can't speak up. Barack Obama understood that he had his eye on the prize, but he wanted to let black folk know, so he signified, I'm with you, but don't act like you don't understand. I got to do this thing in such a fashion that everybody feels that they participate in my dream. But I'm going to throw you a rhetorical bone by signifying that I understand where you're coming from, I know how to speak the language, and I can talk that talk. That's incidental blackness. Now, accidental blackness is when you go to the company picnic and you want a raise. You take your blackness to the gate, you say, now look, you stay right here. I'm gonna be right back. Don't go home with nobody, just stay right here. You're going, hi, how are you? Fine, how are you? Bye, Jiminy Christmas. Did you see that Doris Day movie last night? It's amazing. Que sera, sera, whatever will be, will be. The future's, loved it. Rock Hudson, interesting guy. I have the race, thanks. See you tomorrow, bye. Have some of that apple pie I left you. See ya. All right, come on, blackness. Look, you got a raise too. We both got to eat. And so all I'm saying, my brothers and sisters, is that Barack Obama challenges narrow narratives, murderous myths of racial authenticity from within blackness. And he challenges America to accept the fact that it is the content of your character and not the color of your skin. And at the same time, we can be all that we were meant to be by the God or the force of the universe that created us. And as I take my seat, when I think about King and Obama stenciled or steamed onto T-shirts, they ain't the same person. Neither should they be. One's a politician, the other is a prophet. They got different jobs, y'all. Don't expect Barack Obama to be Martin Luther King Jr. He can't do it. That's not his job description. That's not what the presidency is called for. It calls for him to adjudicate competing claims about resource distribution. We must make arguments that are valid and legitimate as African American people on the common will, but do so with an eye toward making the entire society better, even as we argue for our particular group. All groups should be created and recognized equally. So Barack Obama's job as president is to do that, to use the American presidency as a bully pulpit to make the nation greater. Now, that doesn't mean he has to ignore his blackness or the claims of people who look like him, who made it possible for him to become what he is. Black folks sometimes get this twisted. They think that if you criticize Barack Obama, it's a sacrilegious event. You must hold him high in esteem. You must hold him in prayer, and you must hold him accountable. if he don't do what he said he gonna do, you don't give him no slack because he's a brother. If you messed up doing what you said you was gonna do, you don't get our vote. I don't care what color you are, because he's asked not to be treated based upon his color. So don't you appeal to tribalism to excuse the necessity for you to hold him accountable. Now, Barack Obama, when asked by Wolf Blitzer, tell us why Martin Luther King Jr. would support your candidacy, he said he wouldn't. None of us would he support. He would get America to hold us accountable. Why would you deny Obama being held accountable when he himself has envisioned his presidency being held accountable? And so, my brothers and sisters, I say to you that Barack Obama is a president and Martin Luther King Jr. is a prophet. Prophets make presidents uncomfortable. Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton ain't lost no job because Barack Obama is employed. That's one brother in public housing on 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Those are some great digs, mind you. But we must not be seduced by the notion that while Obama's in the White House, Brother Oscar in Oakland shot in his back. Brother Grimes on New Year's Day in New Orleans with a hail of 40 bullets. And so it's Obama and Oscar. It's those over-incarcerated black males who, through no fault of their own, who don't deserve to be thrown away because they made a mistake. And it is their appreciation for the fact that the nation has made an enormous leap forward with Barack Obama's presidency that we all should be proud of. But prophets sometimes do difficult things like criticize politicians. And we must have both and, not either or. We need prophets and politicians. When most black folk heard what Jeremiah Wright said, they weren't surprised. Most black folk initially said, now tell me the part of Jeremiah Wright's speech that was messed up. I'm just trying to get it. I'm trying to get the part he was wrong on. Of course, you don't have to agree that AIDS is created to hurt black people, but a lot of people do. The most famous person who put that notion forward about 11 years ago was Bill Cosby. So it ain't just poor black folk with paranoia and conspiracy who believe that. I don't believe that, but I understand the skepticism of science. Not science, but scientists. We ain't afraid of science, we're afraid of scientists. Not technology, but technicians. So my point simply is, when Jeremiah Wright's prophetic urge, regardless of whether you agree with him or not, his argument was rooted in the fact that we must criticize a nation that is gone astray. That's not a president's job. He is to protect the Union. He is to preserve and provide through his oath. The common will of America to be united. Benjamin Franklin said we must hold it together. Thomas Jefferson said we must unite it. Barack Obama is in that tradition of Lincoln, most especially, not King. But King's tradition must live too. King's tradition of prophetic expression must live on because we must hold Pharaoh accountable. We're going to have some cognitive dissonance because now Moses has yielded to Pharaoh. David is now Goliath. In one sense, Barack Obama is the man. And the man. That's a beautiful dilemma to have. And as I take my seat, then he is the president, not a prophet. But King is a prophet who must speak to presidents and politicians. We need both of them. And so as I take my seat, I will sign books and then take to the air and go back to Washington, D.C. I'm going to be on the Today Show, and then I'm making my way to the mall. Not to buy an iPod, the one in Washington, D.C., where I'm going to see a brother stride up on stage, Bruce Roberts, who can't even imagine the world from which Barack Obama comes, has to administer the oath of office to a brother. They called him a terrorist. They called him a communist. They called him a Marxist. But tomorrow they're going to call him President of the United States of America. That's the embodiment of the dream. Peace.